Welcome to Milestone Moments, the show where we explore the journeys that lead to success. I'm Sheila Slick, your host and founder of 5 Milestones. In every episode, we will bring you insights from the minds of entrepreneurs, leaders, and experts who will share not just their expertise, but the milestone moments that have reshaped their journeys and led to significant achievements. So if you're looking for motivation, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and discover the milestones that mark the path to success. Welcome to another episode of Milestone Moments in Business and Leadership. I'm Sheila Slick, your host. And today, my special guest is Lenore Kantor. Lenore is a transformational coach, author, mentor, career advisor, and inspirational speaker. She guides smart high achievers to greater personal growth, professional fulfillment, and higher income by overcoming their blocks to creating soul-aligned work. She is the author of So What Do You Do? The Authentic Alchemy Path to Find Who You Are, an unconventional guidebook and 8-step path for conscious leaders to discover their work in the world. Welcome to the show, Lenore.
Thank you, Sheila. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Let's start talking about your book. So, what do you do? I'd love for you to share a pivotal moment from your own life, your own journey that led you to develop this framework and perhaps an example of how it has led to a transformation.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So I spent about 20 years in the corporate world as a financial marketing executive, and I was a high achiever. I didn't start that way. I originally went to business school hoping to work in nonprofit. And then as things happen, you get exposed to new avenues. And I went in a completely different direction. And I had helped take a company public. And shortly thereafter, we were acquired by a much larger organization. And I had been working in an entrepreneurial environment. So we went from 150 people to 300 to 50,000. So a few months into working through that corporate integration process, I left the meeting, went into the bathroom, and started bawling my eyes out. I knew I just couldn't keep working in the environment where I was doing work that didn't align with what I cared most about. I think I'd been working on some brand strategy, and I just knew like it wasn't really going anywhere. And I call that a tower moment for those who are familiar with the tarot, which talks about our life journey and archetypes. The tower is when your world falls apart. The building is burning. People are jumping out. It's been built on an unstable foundation. And this happens to so many people with different experiences in their life. And for me, it was this emotional breakdown that led to a breakthrough where I realized I needed to really live much more in alignment, not just with my head, but also my heart and my soul. And I had been training as a life coach. I was actually doing that as a side hustle for a few years. And I knew I needed to leave the corporate world. And I thought, if I hate it, I'll go back. But once I went on the path of starting my own business, I just loved it. Once I learned how to ride the uncertainty of it, right? Because there's a lot of unpredictability. It took me a few years to detox. I call that PTSD, getting it out of your system and feeling like you can do it on your own. But essentially, I was working as an outsourced chief marketing officer and doing coaching work with leaders, executives, and founders. And I kept getting more training in somatic practices and other areas. And about 2 years ago, after I'd finished my energy medicine training, I decided it was time for me to write the book. I had about 8 drafts in my folder that were waiting to be written, and I just never pulled the trigger. And finally, it felt like it was time, and it was really a process of going through all the things that I've learned in my work with over 1,000 leaders to identify really what were the key elements that needed to be addressed. And long story short, what I've seen is there's a lot of focus on the external, right? Our resume, our LinkedIn profile, networking, those are all important. However, only looking outside ourselves doesn't address the inner work. What do we most care about? Who do we want to be? What's the impact we want to make on the world? What do we want to be known for? And so that's really the work that I feel is most important is helping people understand what they want to create, where they are now, and what is getting in the way. And usually there are things that come up from the past that keep us from realizing our future vision. And so that's really a lot of the work that I guide people through in the Authentic Alchemy Path is how they can understand where they may be blocking themselves or how they may be prevented from moving forward and how they can clear and release those things to step into the vision they want to create.
I've been focusing a lot on self leadership because, it all begins from within. And
Yeah.
for me, that self awareness that I told you about before, I practice often, it often reveals certain things. And so I love that you went through the process as well while you then turned it into a program. And I'm glad to hear that you did the switch and you're happy with that. And that's part of your purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
So you integrate multiple modalities in your coaching approach. You use business strategy and somatic practices, even energy work. How do you determine which tools to use with different clients? And do you receive any kind of resistance when you're introducing more spiritual elements to high achieving professionals?
Yeah, this is such a great question because, having come out of the corporate world, I was in my head a lot, right? And a lot of us, we want the answers, like, tell me what to do. So I used to do strategy sessions and I was very happy to tell people, well, you should do this, this, and this. But what I realized is I don't want to give people the answers. They know for themselves what is true, but fear and resistance and other things get in the way and prevent us from connecting with our heart, right? So if we're worried about money and we have scarcity issues, or we have a family and obligations, all these other things, they can keep us from wanting to do what we're drawn to because we feel like we have to be practical. I mean, there are so many different reasons. So, what I try to do is create a space where people feel safe to connect with their truth. And for everyone, it's a little different. I mean, I do find a lot of, I came out of the financial technology space. So, technologists, finance folks, they're very quantitative oriented. Give me the numbers, show me the money. And there's a place for that, but I do try and get underneath that. Is that really all that's important? And if someone is really focused there, I'm probably not the right coach for them because I try and take this holistic view that we're more than just our utility, right? So I think our society defines us in terms of our value, our productivity, our performance. It's very quantitative. But in fact, there is this whole qualitative element, which is what are our values? What do we care about? So I really want people to recognize how that is important for them. And that does come back to a willingness to feel, like to connect with our emotions, right? What is authenticity? It's when our words, our thoughts, our actions, our emotions, our energy, and our environment are all aligned. So we can't only be in our heads. So I do usually try and introduce some embodiment practices because I find that's a good way in. If I notice someone is feeling tense, I'll be like, oh, where's it? Do you feel tightness in your head? Your head, your shoulders? Can you bring your energy down? And some of them struggle with that. Maybe they can't feel it. And so we really try to engage, and I like to meet people wherever they're at. However, I have found that many people do have an interest in connecting more spiritually. Anyone who's a little creative, once you open that up, I'll sometimes bring in tarot and oracle cards, or we do storytelling or other exercises like that, creating personal rituals. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. I worked with one financial executive, and this guy had had a very bad experience. We did a lot of release work around that, letting go of something that he'd been literally carrying for years and it was holding him back. And so we talked about, how do you let go of something that's not serving you? And then we did a ritual, and he loved the water. And I told him to go down to the ocean, take stones, throw it in the water, and use that to release it. And so, I think there are many ways that you can find a connection for people that resonates with them. And that's really what I believe. Everything is unique. I don't feel there are any cookie cutter approaches.
You brought me back when I had a similar experience. I picked up seashells and I started thanking them and releasing them into the ocean. And right now that you said that, it's like, wait, maybe I was practicing some kind of release in my subconscious because I didn't do it with that intention, but it felt good.
Yeah, yeah, it's so beautiful. I think there is, when we're conscious and intentional in whatever we're doing, we bring a different level of energy and focus that gives it more. So,
It must be a challenge too, because you're in a major city. You're surrounded by the stock market, financial. I mean, that's a high stress environment. This is where you would imagine they're, going 24/7 and they don't know when to stop. There's a really high burnout rate in that area and industry. As fast paced as we get in the United States of America. So
yeah.
I can only imagine that transformation when you're able to put them in that different space to really look outside and beyond the financial market, right? It's not all about the finances. Like you said, it is for some, but I think
Yeah.
that's great work and you're in the perfect place to help.
Yeah, what I would say is, I don't think everybody is really ready to step away, right? There's such a thing as golden handcuffs for a reason. People get paid a lot of money to continue doing what they're doing. And unfortunately, I think for some people, it takes a wake up call. So I had a classmate from college died of a brain aneurysm. Now, maybe he had health issues in his family, but my observation, because I had spoken with him at a reunion, was that this guy was working in a job that he hated, and he felt an obligation to maintain his lifestyle. And that kind of stress and pressure, it takes its toll. I mean, hopefully it doesn't come to that, but I know many people do suffer health scares or divorce or family crisis or other things that, that I don't want to say they bring upon themselves, but that become a byproduct of not looking at ways that they're out of balance. I've worked with many clients who have found it hard to set boundaries. They answer email messages and phone calls and texts at all hours of the night and then wonder why they burn out. So, part of this is helping people develop strategies. We were talking about self awareness to see what is their part in perpetuating patterns and habits that no longer serve them.
So many of your clients are seeking greater purpose and meaning in their work. What patterns have you observed about why smart, successful people often feel disconnected from their soul aligned work? And what's that first step you recommend to begin that reconnection process?
Yeah, I like to listen to what is unsaid. But what I most often find is people have a longing, right? They're passionate about something, but they don't believe they can make money at it. Or they were shamed for whatever they cared about. Oh, you were too sensitive. That was my story, right? Oh, you care too much or whatever. Or why are you over? Because I used to read all of this stuff. in people and the energy. And so that was frowned upon, right? And then I went into an industry where emotions were not allowed. And so, what I try to create space for is for people to really connect with the parts of themselves that are their deepest desire and longing. And so, one woman I worked with, she really wanted to create films around saving the environment, for example, or sustainable change. And she was used to getting a steady paycheck and working in a corporate environment. And I was like, that's not calling you anymore. So it's about helping people see that maybe there's a path forward for them to do what they want. It may not look the way they expected, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. They need to find a creative path to make it happen. Worked with another. She was a corporate salesperson. She wanted to be a nutritionist. She was a mom. She wanted more time for her kids. And we worked with her around helping her believe she really could work with other mothers to give them, healthy food and exercise tips. And once you kind of open up for people that their dream is a possibility and they can see that, oh my God, what if I really could do this? And they can feel like, oh, it's possible. It's like you remove this weight off their shoulders and the fear. And then the desire to step into what they want becomes greater than the resistance to deny it. It's like you can't keep pushing the ball under the water, right? And it's going to pop up eventually. And so I think that's really the question for people is, are you going to wait for the ball to pop up and hit you in the face because you have some, big event? Or are you going to sort of look at, oh gosh, what is it that I really want? And how can I move towards having or creating an environment where I can have that in my life?
So you're an author, you're a speaker, and you're a coach. What's your next milestone?
That's a wonderful question. So I love the writing and I don't, many of us write. I had a newsletter for a number of years and the impetus that got me to write my book was that a friend responded to my newsletter. She's like, Lenore, this was so powerful. You should write a book. And somehow I needed that external validation to give me permission. And that was really what caused me to, started me on my journey for the last year and a half. And then in writing the book itself, I discovered so much about that creative process of uncovering and discovering. I have 4 more books at the top of my head that I'm going to be writing, 3 fiction, probably 1 more nonfiction. And that is really the path that I see becoming, a deeply fulfilling aspect of my work. I'm going to continue my coaching work. I would say what I let go of was some of the organizational change work I used to do because I was finding that it really came down to the leaders. Changing an organization when you have an executive in charge who's unwilling to change is a recipe for frustration. And I just found that I really wanted to work with the leaders who were willing to do the work needed to change because it's not easy and they need to be prepared to face it and step into it. And I'm sure you've seen that in the work that you do as well.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm focusing on self leadership before you think of leading others. The person you can change is yourself and lead yourself first.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just reading an article. I don't remember the guy's name, but it was a CEO who was forcing all of his employees to sign non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements so he could protect himself from bad behavior. And, it finally started getting out because people were tired of being suppressed. And hopefully there will start to be more accountability for leaders that really don't take responsibility for the impact of their actions on others. And I think this is an area where clearly the work that you're doing and what I think we both hope for is that as more and more conscious leaders step into their purpose and live with their values leading, it's going to create a different environment for everybody. That's certainly my desire.
Yes, and I love sharing perspectives because when it comes down to, doing things and how it should be done, or your experience is different than mine, it only complements each other when you have all of these different ways to get to that same spot. So I've really enjoyed today's conversation. I look forward to reading more of your books. It does get addicting because I started writing a lot too. Keep changing the version, like rereading it. And so you inspired me today.
All right, so I'm going to give you one big tip is that I do think that, for lack of a better expression, you're birthing a book and you don't know what the end form is going to be. And you can go in with a concept, but in the writing and the research, the analysis, it may emerge in a completely different way. And that's really the journey, is to let it unfold in the way that it's meant to. Because I'll just share with you, I originally had a 3-step process, and then it was a 5-step process, and it became an 8-step process. And that was only as I went through it and I really came up with the framework and, kind of conceptualized everything and made sure that it came together in a way that was really solid and substantial, that I felt complete. And so I just share that with you, that you can't know where it's going to take you, and you sort of need to let it lead you on the journey to evolve the way that it's meant to. And I think that is the process. That's the creative process. And what makes the experience frustrating, but ultimately deeply satisfying and enjoyable.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I will leave Lenore's contact information and website information and a link so that you can learn more about her book in the notes of the episode. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sheila. This was such a pleasure.
And thank you to all who tuned in to another episode of Milestone Moments in Business and Leadership. Until next time.